Welcome to Illustrated Beards, Season 2, brought to you by The Fantasy Shop, best in comics and games since 1981. I am Jason. My guest for the evening is Scott Marchino. He is a customer of mine, really awesome dude. And our reviews for tonight, we have chosen Infinity, number 6, Conclusion to the Infinity Arc.
Star Trek, issue number 27. It's the third part of the Khitomer conflict.
Batman Incorporated, Volume 2 hardcover, which is technically, again, Volume 3 of the Batman Incorporated story, but Volume 2 of New 52. So, interesting read, though. Really, really fun. So yeah, we'll start with Star Trek.
Khitomer Conflict Part 3. Obviously, you're jumping into the middle of the arc if you start with this, but what they have done since Into Darkness has really kind of tied all the continuity together from the movie, from what they've done previously in the comics, throwing a little bit from the old continuity and the old shows, even the video games. They're pulling it all together and they're really making this its own world and its own story. And the Khitomer conflict has just been a really, really solid arc so far. And one of the highlights of all of it is the way the characters are captured and interact.
What we know about them is static. We kind of have that ingrained into our memory who these people are, but they, again, tweak them just enough to make it interesting and fresh. And their motivations, while still remaining true to what we know, have changed just enough to where, you know, you're seeing, like in this issue particularly, you see Spock disobey Starfleet orders before the movie, the Star Trek movie, where we just didn't see that. He was always the very logical, following orders. So it's interesting to see the more human side of him take hold. And some people I've heard don't really like that. I personally enjoy it quite a bit.
I do too. The core of the characters are the same that we've always seen. They're still the same person, just in a different situation, making new decisions.
Well, and I think that's explained away too. He never took the Kolinar.
It's true.
You know, and that's something that is drastically different from where we were, you know, years ago when we watched the original series. This was a man who had taken a Vulcan discipline that had purged the emotion from himself and allowed himself to embrace logic fully. In this comic world and in the movie world, he went and joined Starfleet first. And so the human side of him never got sublimated.
Right.
So,
well, a lot of people also remember, you know, the Spock from the movies, and the comic and the new movie continuity were not to that Spock yet.
We're seeing them at the helm of the ship much younger than they were ever before.
Yes.
I mean, even way back when they started. I mean, these are supposed to be people in their 40s, their 30s, their 40s. You know.
Right. They've been together for a little bit, and here they're just geting together, just starting on this trip. So
yeah, I'd like to comment too on the art a little bit, because we talked about how it's kind of got a static feel to it. When you're trying to translate what is this actor's, you know, face into a comic, and that comes across as a little plain. But the one thing that impresses me in the book is the Klingons.
Yes.
They very much, I mean, we saw them for the first time in Into Darkness. It was different than what we remember them. You know, they actually have just gone ahead and added the ridges to their heads, and they had those weird piercings in the ridges, which was kind of cool. I liked that. But the translation of that, it doesn't have to be perfect. So when you put the Klingons in this book, they can look how they need them to. Right. I really enjoy the ships.
Yes.
Like, and I'm curious whether or not what we see in this comic will translate into the movie world.
I would love for that to happen. I'd be surprised, but I would love for that to happen.
It's a completely different, I mean, you know, when the ones we saw in the little drop ships in Into Darkness kind of looked like early Birds of Prey.
Right.
Which is cool, and I was happy to see that. But when you look at the ships in their armada in this comic story, they're drastically different. I mean, they don't read as Klingon ships at all.
Right.
I mean, they look completely
different. It's a
different.
very logical extrapolation on what they could have based on the first of the new movies. You know, given what we see in that movie, well, maybe they did this with their ships.
Right.
So.
But yeah, I mean, this whole book, I mean, coming up, we were at 27 issues now.
Yep, it's 27.
Yeah, they've done a really good job, I think, of keeping it true to what it should be.
Yes.
And using it as a platform into the movie world.
Right, and since the movie, they've gotten a lot more freedom to really build the universe, and that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing, you know, the start of their 5-year mission.
Yep.
Which is interesting, because that was the premise of the TV show.
Exactly.
You know, this 5-year mission that they're on. So I think it's cool to see it build from that and continue to evolve and influence that in a way.
Yes.
You know?
I'm very anxious to see where the movies go and how much they build from the comics.
I think we're gonna have to wait. I mean, I'm excited about J.J. Abrams doing Star Wars. But I mean, what that means is Star Trek will have to be put on the back burner for a little while, and maybe he'll come back to it later.
Yeah.
But Star Trek 27, if you're interested in reading about the expanded movie universe, I've got all the trades. We constantly try to keep them in stock. I speak very highly of this book. I know Scott always does when he's in here. So yeah, come to the store, check it out. It's really a fantastic read. So that brings us to Infinity, number 6. This is the conclusion of Jonathan Hickman's opus that he kind of built to from the beginning of Marvel Now. He was writing the Avengers and the New Avengers book leading up to this. So, I mean, the New Avengers book became kind of a book about the Illuminati. The Avengers book became, the Captain America and expanding the team on a universal scale, which was interesting to see. And that all comes to a head during the Infinity storyline. Just to give you a little backstory, the Builders are this ancient race of beings that were creators of the universe. And they have deemed that the universe is no longer worthy of life. So they are going around and they're going to destroy what they built and start over and rebuild and try again. And that becomes a very big threat to not only Earth, which I think is a pitfall that a lot of writers that write the Avengers fall into. Like, they put the threats on Earth, and it's like the Marvel universe has always been so much bigger than that, and that's what this book comes to. And this is the conclusion. I mean, it all comes to a head on Earth. We spent most of the story out in space and dealing with that, but it all comes back to Earth because while they've been away, Thanos has been attacking Earth. He was looking for his son, who he found, Thane. Thanos has been going around literally trying to eliminate his children from the universe because they will be a threat to him. And that is why he calls it the tribute. The tribute is the head of his child. And he's captured Thane by the time the Avengers get back to Earth, but man, there's just a really big battle that takes place between what's left of the Avengers forces and Thanos and his generals, which are the aliens that are hanging out with him. They've become like his generals in his army, Corvus Glaive and Supergiant and all these other crazy alien characters. But it was really fun. It was. Like, just a really fantastic, grandiose, large-scale battle.
I have not read any of these before this, but I had a lot of fun reading this book because, like you said, coming into it cold, you could just get the sense from the first few pages, this is the big climax, and it felt like it, and it was a fun read. And,
right.
And by the end of it, maybe want to go back and pick up the other ones, which I did do sitting here in the store a little bit.
Yeah, I looked at some of the other issues, yeah. But we kind of see a rise of what could, I guess, possibly be a new enemy in Thane. I mean, Thane is the child of Thanos. Before it was revealed to him that this is who he was trying to live a peaceful life. And he was trying to he didn't know, he was unaware that he was the child of Thanos. But he had very much been a good guy. And then the Terrigen wave hit the Earth, and this is a thing that grants Inhumans their powers. So yeah, I mean, he realized who he was. The entire village that he lived in was wiped out when his powers first manifested themselves. So what we realize is that he, like Thanos, has the power to bring death. And here in the end of the story, he uses his powers for the first time under his own control. The other times have been, it's outside of his purview. He can't really understand what he's doing. But he used it for the first time to stop Thanos, and he kind of encases him in like a big orange cube. They call it living death, the state of living death, which means, I mean, they haven't taken Thanos out of the world. Right. Obviously, that he's still there. He's actually, by the end, I guess, in the possession of the Illuminati. So you got, Doctor Strange and Black Panther and Iron Man and some of these other characters. The Submariner, Namor, who I've always thought is kind of a silly character. He's a poor man's Aquaman. But so yeah, I was very pleased with how it all came together. We see the rise of some new power in the universe. The Skrull Empire coming into this story was decimated. I mean, there was hardly any of them left. And by the end, a new emperor of their people is crowned. Ronan the Accuser goes back to the Kree homeworld, and the Supreme Intelligence, who thought they should never be a part of this fight, welcomes him back.
Definitely got at the end of this that this was a stepping off point for a lot of new and interesting things to be happening.
Yeah, and I think Marvel crossovers definitely fall into one of two categories. Some of them are really, really well done, and most of those are X-Men crossovers. They come to a legitimate, good conclusion that also, as well as concluding the story in a good way, gives birth to something else. And then the other category is most of the time the Avengers crossovers, which kind of are only used to build something else. They don't have a solid ending to their story. The story will be fun all the way through, but the ending always is kind of a big letdown. Yeah. This is the first time an Avengers crossover in recent memory has come to a solid conclusion while still being able to build on something else. So yeah, I mean, definitely tracking down the first few issues of Infinity is probably going to be next to impossible at this point unless you're willing to take some second printings. But with 6 out on the shelf and the epilogue and New Avengers coming out on the same day, it won't be too long before you see it all collected into one massive book. So if you're interested in reading what I can only say, like I said, is one of the best Avengers crossovers I've read in recent memory, and it's a credit to Jonathan Hickman. He's just a very good writer in everything he does. I mean, he writes for Marvel, he writes for some independent companies, and he's fantastic at what he does. This issue particularly was illustrated by Jim Chung, and his art is gorgeous.
Yeah.
When you see his art in this book, you understand why he is one of the top guys at Marvel right now. Keep your eyes out for the collected edition, Infinity Part 6 of 6, and our trade that we have selected. Well, it's a hardcover, I guess. Batman Incorporated Volume 2, Gotham's Most Wanted, the conclusion of Grant Morrison's story, which he started building on prior to the New 52 initiative. Grant Morrison definitely writes with a bigger picture in mind.
Yeah.
I mean, you were saying, it reads hard as single issues.
Yes.
They don't have a good ending or beginning and ending.
Yeah, I'm not generally speaking a big Grant Morrison fan, but I did enjoy his run on Batman Incorporated and what he did with the character, particularly the character of Damian. As a collected work, it's a great read. Individually, you don't feel like the books necessarily begin or end, and that's because they don't. It's one big, long story.
Right. It's worth saying, the last issue of this run literally starts where the first issue of this run started. Definitely, if you're going to read it, I highly recommend, and I think Scott would agree, read it as one story.
Yes.
Don't stop. If you start, keep going.
Right.
Because you're definitely going to come across things that aren't going to make sense to you until 5 issues later. And I think that's what turns off fans of comics to Grant Morrison's writing.
I would agree.
But I mean, I really think if people would stick it out and follow it through to the end, they would really be pleased with how it all came together. But I mean, you can see here on the front the sad image of Robin. I mean, it's not sad. It was a beautiful image. Damian Wayne, the actual real blood son of Bruce Wayne. We've talked about it before. Damian died during this story. It's Batman Incorporated number 8. Man, the fight. You want to talk about going out as a warrior, going out as you lived. I mean, he's always been one of those guys that skirted the line between good and evil. He was raised for the first 10 years of his life as an assassin. He was trained to one day replace the Batman.
And this story, it really peaks with that issue 8, in my opinion. The death of Damian was huge. And everything after that is, as you said earlier, is reaction.
Some fans of the Batman I've heard that have read this story have said that their reactions were almost a little too exaggerated. You get a moment where Batman injects himself with Man-Bat serum in order to become a more effective fighter in this final conflict. And I don't think that there's anything outside of Batman's purview when it comes to his family.
Speaking as a father, yeah, you'd do anything.
Right. And when I say his family, I don't just mean Damian. I mean, if Dick Grayson were to have fallen in this moment as opposed to Damian, that would have been the same reaction. These people around him are his family. So, you have this big, epic fight between Damian, and what we find out in the story is a clone of Damian. And then, he fails in his mission to stop the Batman, and Talia, she kills him. I mean, she decapitates him actually in a very brutal fashion.
Yes.
Yeah. And I guess, I mean, a lot of that comes down to the fact that she has clones of this kid, so she has no attachment to any version of him at all. And the fact that she's the one who gives the order to kill what is the real Damian shows that she just really has no compassion for this character.
Right.
For this child that is hers. It comes down to the fight between Talia and Bruce, and it's in classic Ra's al Ghul versus Batman fashion, it's a sword fight.
Oh, yeah.
And that is, you commented on the kind of throwback, the way they did the intro page of this. What we've come to expect from the Batman story is it always comes down to, like, one of us is going to die. I'm going to kill you or you're going to kill me. And the Batman refuses to kill. As angry and as devastated as he is by the fact that his son is taken away from him, that's just not a line he's willing to cross. Enter, Kathy Kane. If you don't remember Kathy Kane, she was the original Batwoman. They're kind of having their sword fight and they're kind of bantering and going back and forth. And all of a sudden, Talia just gets a bullet in her head and just goes down. And it's Kathy Kane standing there, had come into the cave. And there's a little mystery as to why she's even there.
Right.
Like, Batman himself doesn't understand what this even has to do with her at all. But yeah, so what we see in this story is the end of Talia. Now, the Damian Son of Batman story, which is a kind of a follow-up to this in a way, a future timeline for Damian, has Talia in it. So, Lazarus Pit, I'm thinking. Ra's, even though he was angry at Talia for her part in this,
It's his daughter.
It's his daughter, yeah. Ra's would be the guy to do it. I mean, he will get his daughter and he will revive her, and she'll probably come back sooner rather than later. And I mean, coming back sooner rather than later is something that we wonder about Damian at the end of this story.
Yes.
Raish now has control of the clone farm with just these hundreds of clones of Damian. And what we've seen in Damian, Son of Batman is, you can't breed out who this kid is. No matter what you do, no matter what you try to change in him, he will always follow this path. We've killed the original. That version of him is a clone, and it still went. That clone still followed the Batman.
The moment that he has with Dick Grayson just before he dies is, he and Dick Grayson, when Dick was Batman, was the best Batman and Robin relationship.
It really was.
It was so much fun. And we get just a flavor of that, and we get them, without saying goodbye, they have their last moment, and it's just like 2 pages worth maybe, and it's wonderful.
Especially going back and reading it again, knowing where it goes from there.
Yeah.
I mean, you see this moment, like you said, it's not their final goodbye because they don't know what's going to happen, but it feels like that once you know the outcome.
Exactly.
It feels like this last moment Morrison was giving to them as partners. Batman and Robin was one of that was the best Batman and Robin banter we ever saw, I think. Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan of Grant Morrison, always. I mean, if he puts his name on something, I'm going to give it a try. Chris Burnham took over as artist for this New 52 arc. He did it from 1 all the way to 13, and he's got a Frank Quitely style to him. Mm-hmm. And I always liked Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely doing things together. He always seems to be the artist he chooses. Like, we're gonna start this arc. Come do it, Frank.
At first, I wasn't real sold on the art, but it grew on me really quickly. Not overly detailed, but they really convey the emotion that the characters are feeling. Yeah,
definitely. All right, so yeah, I mean, Batman Incorporated, I know I have in the store the pre-New 52 deluxe edition. It's got all the stuff that happened prior to New 52, and then Grant Morrison didn't really follow suit with everybody else. He just kind of kept telling his story, and they let him because he's Grant Morrison. So that brings us to the end. I would like to, again, say thanks to Scott for coming out and hanging out and talking to us.
It was a pleasure.
And thank you all out there for sitting and listening to us talk about some of our favorite things.